Okay, this is assignment 2.1.11.2 using the infrared remote basically. This time we're going to use the infrared remote though to kind of do some different things with it so that we can kind of show how you can program the remote or use the remote to program other things and use it for other kinds of tasks. All right, so again, the last assignment, we used the remote to capture signals from capture the signals that we get from the remote, so that we could keep track of those, and we put all those into a Google Sheets document. And so we're going to be using that information basically to blink some LEDs on our Arduino, basically using our Arduino, depending on which kind of button we push on the remote. Alright, so we're going to start by getting some parts together again. So we get the Arduino, we need a breadboard, we need the IR remote. We're going to use the IR sensor again to read the signals from the IR remote. We're going to need 5 LEDs. We're going to need 5 330 ohm resistors to go with those LEDs. And we're going to need 10 jumper wires. Okay, here's our virtual circuit. So we're going to get our components together. So we're going to start with some resistors. So we're going to get the resistor. Again, don't forget to change this to 330 ohm so we get the right ones. Okay, so we got 5 330 ohm resistors. Now we need 5 LEDs. All right, so I'm going to start putting these LEDs with the resistors in. Again, the resistors are going to go on the cathode leg or the shorter leg here. So again, on the LED here, this is the crooked one here is more the longer leg. All right, so I'm going to hook the resistor into the negative channel of my breadboard and into the connecting to the same channel as the shorter leg on my LED here. So. Okay, so I have all those hooked up. All right, now we're going to get my infrared remote sensor. So just look for IR. Here we go. So here's my here's my infrared sensor, and then I also need the remote here. So get those two. I'll plug that one in here. All right. Now it's time to wire up this thing. So again, we'll start by putting our ground or our voltage and ground into the right channels here. Make that red. Ground goes in the black. Our ground goes in the negative. Make it black. Okay. Now the other leg of my LED, we're going to put that into our Arduino board here. And we're going to do 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Brown. All right, so we got all our LEDs hooked up now to the Arduino board. I just need to get this IR sensor hooked up. All right, so the out pin basically is going to get hooked up to digital pin 3. Get that lined up a little better there. All right, and we're going to make that gray. All right, the ground goes to the negative channel here. So just kind of run a wire over to there, make that black. And then the VCC, which is the positive voltage, is going to get sent to the positive channel on our breadboard. Again, make that red. All right, and that's it. Now we're all set. We're all got everything hooked up here, and we're ready to go. Okay, so again, for coding, again, we're going to remind you that we're using libraries. Again, this is because, of course, coders are lazy. We typically need, or we typically try to use other people's code whenever possible. And libraries make that kind of easy to do. Again, libraries are groups of functions that have similar kinds of attributes and so forth. And we just, again, it's easier to call that code into our program and use that code rather than kind of reinventing the wheel every time. For this project, of course, we'll be using the library for the IR remote that can include several different functions and how to interpret signals from that we receive from the remote. And also has a list of other remotes, different kinds of remotes in there. Okay. All right. So again, first of all, we're going to start by commenting first, coding last. So we start with the comments at the top here. This sketch is going to allow us to control a series of LEDs and flash them based on commands from our IR remote. And we'll start by downloading the library for the remote. Next, we'll set our pin variables. So we'll type in these comments. Again, we'll set up the pin variable for the IR sensor. We'll set up the LED pins. And then we need some code from the IR library to help receive the signal. Okay. The setup function, we're going to basically set up the LED pins for output. Then we're going to set up the serial monitor, and then we're going to start the receiver so that it's ready to start receiving signals from the IR remote. Now, in the loop function, we're going to use an if statement to kind of check to see if the sensor has received any data from the remote. So we're going to use type in that comment first. The first thing we want to do is we want to print the results of our signal as a hexadecimal 32-bit number. So we're going to do that to our serial monitor. Okay. All right. Now we're going to be using the decimal values of the IR remote that we figured out in the last assignment. And we're also going to be using the hexadecimal information too. But basically, we're going to start with the decimal values to kind of pull off any kind of information for the buttons 1 through 5, because what we want to do basically is we want to call a function for lighting that indicated LED. Okay. Now, the other thing we want to do is we want to take the decimal values that fall between the buttons for the up and down, and then we're going to do a different function where we light the LEDs in a certain direction or the opposite direction, depending on if you hit the up button or down button. Okay. All right, and the last thing we want to do for the if or the loop is basically receive the next value. So we're going to listen for the next signal we get from the IR remote. Okay. Now the one function that we're going to create, one of the functions that we're going to create is called light LED function. So create that light LED function. Basically, this function will light an LED corresponding to the button on the remote that's pushed. So if I push button number 1, it should light up LED number 1. If it pushed button number 2, it should light LED number 2, and so forth. Okay. Now we're going to use a command called the switch case command to do this. And the switch case command makes it really easy to kind of take a variable and depending on what value that variable may have, and especially if it has multiple values, to do different actions. So basically, what we do is we create different cases, basically, depending on what value the variable has. So here's the syntax for it, the way you put it on. Okay, so basically the way the syntax works is we start with the switch command. And then inside these parentheses, we put in the variable that we're going to evaluate. Basically, the variable we're looking for the values of to do different things depending on what that value, the variable value is. All right, so then we go down here, we put a curly bracket because we want to do everything kind of between the curly brackets here. All right, then we type in case, and then we put in one of the possible values. So for example, again, if this was, the numbers 0 through 10, so case would be the first, so 1, basically, and then if the variable was 1, then I would do all the commands after the colon here. All right, and then after I ran all those commands, then I'd hit the break command, and the break command would say, kind of break out of the switch command altogether, and go to the next thing that I want to do. Then if it's not what the first case value, again, then it'll be the second case value and so forth, basically. So each one of the cases, each one of the potential values for the variable here is what it possibly could be, and that's how this one switch case command kind of works. All right. So for the light LED function, we're going to use the following comments. So we're going to start by, we'll use the case command to see which button is pushed. So we're going to light up LED 1 after button 1 is pushed. We're going to light up LED 2 after button 2 is pushed, 3, 4, 5, so forth. So again, we're just going to light, whichever LED I want gets lit based on which button I press on the remote. Okay. Now, for the next function is a blinking direction function, and I want to blink LEDs, kind of all 5 of them, basically, kind of in order. Depending on if I press up or down. So in one case it's going to go one direction, in the other case it goes the other direction. All right. So I'm going to start by creating an index variable for my for loop, because I'm going to use a for loop to kind of light the variable, LEDs in order. Okay. So again, I'm going to use the switch case command. So like with the LED function, basically to determine if it's the down direction, the down button was pushed. All right, then I'm going to turn on the LED pin, I'm going to delay, then I'm going to turn off the LED pin. So I'm going to, run that and do that for all of the values of my LEDs, basically. All right, and then again, if it lights up, if it's the up direction button being pushed, then I do it the same thing, but I do it the opposite direction. So that's how that works. Okay, so it's time to get ready to code, but first of all, we're going to check our comments and our functions, make sure everything is coded correctly before we get started on that. Okay, so here we are back at our virtual circuit. I've typed in all the comments and I've set up the functions. So here's the setup function, here's the loop function, all the comments for that, the light LED function, again, set up the comments for that one, and the blinking direction function, and set all the comments for that. So again, basically I don't expect anything to happen, but I do expect it to kind of run without any errors. So that's what I want to check first. All right, so it looks like it's working, but again, if I press buttons on my remote, again, still nothing happens. So we haven't kind of put in the code yet. So that's what we want, though. All right, so let's go ahead and start typing in the actual code. So again, after our comment about installing the library, we're going to push the hashtag symbol and then include, and then we're going to include the file for the IR remote that already has all our code in there. All right, then for the setup pin for the IR sensor, we're going to set the receive pin, basically, the receive pin variable here, an integer, to 3. Okay, because we have 3 is our digital pin, the digital pin on the Arduino board. All right, then we're going to set up our LED pins. So LED 1 is going to be 13, LED 2 is going to be 12, 11, 10, and 9. All right, so that sets up our LEDs for the different things. All right, now we're going to use the a function from the IR remote library to kind of help decode the signals. That's the IR receive function, basically, and we're going to set up a variable for that. But we're setting up the function for that. We're going to use the receive pin variable that we set up before to tell it which pin we're using for that. All right, and then we're going to decode the results into a results variable. All right, we're going to turn on our serial monitor. All right, and then we're going to start the receiver. So the IR receive function is going to be enabled for infrared in. Okay. All right, then we need to set up our LED pins for output. So our pin mode for LED 1 is going to be output, and pin mode for LED 2 is output, 3, 4, 5, so forth. So we have our LED pins set for output. All right, now inside our loop function, we're going to start with our if statement. And our if statement, again, basically is we're going to receive a decoded the value for whatever it's going to be sent to the IR sensor, basically, and it's going to get decoded. And then we use the ampersand here because we want this to kind of be a true or false statement. Basically, if there's a result, then it's true. If there's nothing, then it's a false statement. So we put the ampersand in front of our variable here for results to get that. All right. Then we're going to send our signal, whatever we get here. So if this is true, basically, we're going to send the value of that, the hexadecimal value, basically, to the serial monitor to make sure that we're getting the appropriate signal for our code. And again, we got to put the comma in the hex to make sure that this value here gets changed into a hexadecimal 32-bit number. All right, so then the next thing is, again, if the certain decimal values from the IR remote are between the ones for the number buttons. So again, looking into our data that we took from the last assignment, we know that the number 1 is decimal number basically is this number, and the number 5 decimal number is this number. So we want all the values kind of in between those two. So anything greater than or equal to this, and anything less than or equal to this. That tells us we're using the number buttons on the remote, so we're going to call the function for lighting the LED then. Okay. Now, the other if statement basically is we're going to look for decimal values that are between these two numbers, and that'll tell us if it's the up and down button being pressed. Okay. And if it's the up and down buttons, then we're going to call the blinking direction function to light the LEDs for that. Okay. The last thing we do before we leave the loop function basically is we want to receive the next value from the IR remote. So we're going to go back and say resume there, so it can start receiving values or receiving signals from the IR remote. Okay. Now inside the light LED function, we're going to use our switch case command here to basically pull the values, whatever result value basically that we have for which button was pushed on the IR remote, and then depending on which one, we're going to do a different, we're going to check the case of it basically, and depending on which hexadecimal value we get, that will light different LEDs. So for example, this is if button number 1 is pushed. This is the hexadecimal value for button number 1, and again we got that from our data that we got from the first assignment that we did for this for the infrared remote. Now the thing to keep in mind too is we want to put this 0x in front here of our hexadecimal value to tell the computer, to tell the program that that's what this is. So when you put a 0x in front of a hexadecimal number, then the computer understands that that's what that is. If you don't put the 0x here, basically it treats this like this value here basically as a string variable because it has letters in there. And if it didn't have letters in there, it would be treated like a number variable, a decimal value, and basically cause an error because, again, that's not kind of what we're expecting there. So you got to make sure you put that 0x in front of the hexadecimal here so that it knows that that's a hexadecimal number. All right, so then we put a colon, and then we put in our digital write here so that we want, again, since button 1 is being pushed, we want to set LED 1 to high and everything else to low. That will turn off if there's any other LEDs on at the time. It'll turn those off and only turn on the high one. All right. Then we break, okay, because if it is this value, basically we want to make sure we break out of the case here, out of the switch command, and go back to the loop. Okay. Same thing here for button 2. This is the value, the hexadecimal value for button 2. But now we want to turn off LED 1 and make sure only LED 2 is turned on. Same thing as for 3. If button 3 is pushed, and this is the value for button 3, so we want to turn off 1 and 2 and make sure only 3 is turned on, and 4 and 5 is also turned off. Button 4 is the value is this one. Again, so high for LED 4. And finally, for LED 5, we're going to use this value here, basically, and that tells us that button 5 was pressed, so LED 5 gets turned on. Okay. Now, again, don't forget to close up the curly bracket. We have an extra curly bracket for the switch command that we have to make sure that's there, and hopefully you still have one for the end of the function. So there kind of should be there should be actually 2 kind of curly brackets at the end of this function. Okay. Now, for the blinking direction function, we're going to start by creating an integer variable, or an index variable, sorry. That's an integer variable, that's I, so that's our index variable. All right, and then we're going to use a switch case command again to pull in the results from our IR remote. So we'll see what that is. Now, if the LEDs, or if the down button is pushed, basically, we're going to basically go from 9 to 14. Okay, so we're going to start with I equal to 9 up to 13 basically, so it's less than 14. So I is 9 to 13, so and then we're going to increase I by 1. So basically we're going to write to each of the digital pins high here. We're going to turn on each of the LEDs. We're going to delay 100 milliseconds and then we're going to turn it off. Okay, so we turn it on, wait 100 seconds, turn it off. And basically that'll kind of like make a blinking, the lights to blink in one direction. Okay. All right. Then we break out of our switch variable, and then wait for our next value. Now, if it's the button in the up direction, again, here's the hexadecimal for the up. Now, in this case, we're going to start at 13, and we're going to go down to 9. So we're going to start with I equal to 13. I don't know why I put integer there. It doesn't need to be there. But anyway, so I is is anything greater than 8. So basically, when it hits 8, then it stops. In this case, we're going to subtract. So it's going to go 13, then 12, 11, 10, 9. And again, when it gets 8, then it stops. So it's only going to go 13 to 9. And we're doing the same thing. So we're lighting the high. We're lighting the LED first. Then we're going to delay 100 milliseconds, and then we're going to turn it off, basically, and then we break out of there. So anyway, that's the code. So again, don't forget to close up your curly bracket. Again, we're going to have another curly bracket here for the switch case command, and also for the virtual or the function. So don't forget the ending curly bracket for the function too. All right, now we're going to run, see what it does, see if it does what we expect it to do. If not, troubleshoot it, and see what else is wrong. Okay, so here we are back at the virtual circuit, and I've added the code. So I've included the IR remote library, set up the receive pin, set up all the LED pins, got the functions for receiving the information from the receive pin set, decode the results. I've set the serial monitor going here, so let's turn that on. Got the receive pin, or the receiver, IR receiver ready for input. I got all the LEDs ready for output. Set up the if statement in my loop here. I'm checking to see, the decimal values are between the numbers here, so I can get the right one. Then I'm going to light an LED. Or else if it's between the up and the down, then I'm going to go blinking in the right direction. The other thing too is to keep in mind is don't forget this curly bracket here. I'm not sure if I specified that in the presentation. But we need a curly bracket here for this if statement. So this if statement needs a closing curly bracket, and then we need a final kind of curly bracket for the function. All right, so inside the light LED, again, we're using the switch case command. And again, each case here is the hexadecimal for each of the buttons on the remote. So this is for button 1, this is for button 2, button 3, button 4, button 5. And again, that turns either the LED 1 on, LED 2 on, LED 3, and so forth. Okay, turns on the corresponding LED. All right, and then in the blinking direction, again, we created the index variable I. We got the switch case variables here. Again, if it's going down, then we're going to use this hexadecimal value basically, and we're going to go from 9 to 13, increasing, so 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and then we're going to light it, wait a little bit, and then turn it off. And vice versa. For the up direction, again, if this button is pressed, then we're going to go from 13 down to 9, subtracting as we go, and again, we're going to light it, delay, and then turn it off. Okay, so everything should be good, and don't forget, again, you need a couple curly brackets here at the end so that works. Now, to do this, I'm going to turn on my code editor there. I'm going to shrink this down a little bit so I can kind of see all my number, my remote here. So we can do all that, and we can also keep an eye over here to make sure that our hexadecimal values are getting turned on correctly. So anyway, we should be set to go. So let's start the simulation. So if I press the 1, there we go. We see that lights up. If I press 2, this one should turn off. That one should light up. 3, and then 4, and then 5. All right, so those light up. And then again, if I go down, it should go one way. So we see the blinking going in one direction. And if we press the up, then we go blinking in the opposite direction. Again, the up and down, of course, doesn't correspond to how we have our breadboard set here. But, if you want to, you can switch those two around. But basically, yeah. So we're doing exactly what we expect here with our remote. So we're lighting some LEDs, and we're having that blink in a certain direction and so forth.